What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network for another installment of the best decks in standard format. This is being recorded on December 4th, so after Daytona Regionals and before San Diego Regionals, and the format is Ultra Prism through Cosmic Eclipse. Before we get into my opinions on the best decks in standard format, I just want to shout out my sponsor, PotownStore.com. They specialize in PTC Geo codes, and you are automatically emailed the codes upon purchase. And I have code Celio for 5% off there. And also FlipsideGaming.com, where I write weekly free articles, and you can use my code Celio for 10% off there as well. So, looking at the best decks, first I want to talk about what makes a deck good, and also just kind of emphasize the fact that these are my opinions. So, I do a lot of statistical analysis, but here I'm not analyzing what makes these decks the best decks by a certain number of finishes or wins or whatever. I'm looking at them a little bit objectively and a little bit subjectively, and these are just three things that I'm taking into account when thinking about what makes one of these decks good. So, is the deck inherently good, like Mewtwo and Mew, where the deck is good? One of the reasons it's good is because their cards in it are just so strong. Mewtwo Mew Tag Team, which is the front of the deck, is just so strong, and it has a lot of options, and it has a lot of support around it, especially with Welder for the energy acceleration, and a bunch of GXs to copy strong attacks from. Is the deck a good meta call? An example is Gardevoir this past weekend, or Gardevoir in general. I'm not entirely positive. I would say Gardy was a good call or a safe call, but I definitely think it was like a risky call if you missed its bad matchups. But I will get into that in a bit. And then the last is does it have a good matchup spread? I believe Florges Dollstall has a pretty good matchup spread if things aren't teching for it, or it's not being teched against collaterally by birds techs and things like that, or just things that naturally beat it. But yeah, so taking into account, is the deck just good internally? Is it a good meta call for a tournament? And does it have a good overall matchup spread? Can be some things you take into account when deciding if a deck is good. So for my best decks in standard, we're going to be looking at my first one, which is Mewtwo and Mew. Looking back at other best decks in standard installments, I think Mewtwo and Mew has been on these videos of mine pretty consistently. Like I said, it's very, very good inherently, and the perfection ability, which allows you to use attacks of any GX Pokemon on your bench or discard, allows you to adapt the deck. The deck hasn't been changing too much, but we did get the tag team supporters like Guzmahala, which allows you to search out a weakness guard energy, and then the Malamar, which allows you to heal your Mewtwo by 120 and also switch. So it did get some new tools. I think it has a good matchup spread usually, and it is also just very inherently good, so it doesn't meet some of my criteria for being the best deck. And it's just, like I said, it's inherently good. It's just so strong and overwhelming. It can be aggressive with the Welders, turn 2 Double Blaze for 300. It could be more strategic, use a Mallow and Lana to heal, Turbo Strike to sell some energy for later. It has a lot of different game plans. It's very adaptable, and it's strong and aggressive, and it's more consistent than abilities are, in my opinion, and that's why it's one of my best decks. And so just looking at some results to back it up, for Daytona this past weekend, there were 11 in day 2, 4 made top 16, and 1 made top 8. Also, one of the top 16s were the 9th place bubble. So it didn't overwhelm day 2. It didn't win the event, but I think it's a consistent performer, and it's an extremely strong deck, and it defines our standard format. Next is ADP Keldeo Arceus Dialga Palkia tag team with Keldeo, which is the variant the ADP archetype has found success in. There really hasn't been much success from any other variant aside from the ADP Keldeo. I've seen some experimentation with like ADP Spirit Tomb, and then ADP Keldeo, but also with other attackers in it. Multiple Cryogonal, multiple Absol, which is kind of a different take on the deck. But ADP Keldeo, we saw a lot of disbelief in it, I think, after LAIC. The deck, it's a new deck, right? Cosmic Eclipse just came out, so the deck has some forming to do. We don't know, we don't have optimal lists yet, but I think the lists became much more closer to optimal this past weekend, with Xander Perro's variant playing Rosas and Counter Gain, and Xander took it to second place, and Will Jenkins also was in top 8 with a similar list. I think the deck has a lot going for it. It's fairly consistent. One of the things it's missing is aggression, but it is consistent in what it does. It gets the turn 2 Altered Creation GX, and then the turn 3 Ultimate Ray, the turn 4 Keldeo swinging. And you can also just not even go for the Altered Creation in matchups like Mewtwo. You just attach to Keldeo, pass, attach to Keldeo, pass, attach to Keldeo, start swinging, or use Counter Gain on turn 2 if they knocked out whatever was active. So it has consistency. I think the list has been much more optimized now, and it's also pretty overwhelming, and it's gatekeeping single prize decks. It gets a lot of good matchups that way, and it can naturally counter things like Birds and Dalstall with the Cryogonal, which is just a good attacker anyway, but it's also a great tech against those decks. For the Daytona results this deck took, there were 7 in day 2. 2 of those were top 8, and then 1 of those were the second place. So the best decks, I'm going to just say for this video this week, I'm only calling Mewtwo and Mew and ADP Keldeo the best decks in format. I don't want to extend that further, but I am going to look at some of the other decks that could be considered for best decks in format. And also I have a small little tier list I'll wrap up the video with at the end. So the next deck I want to look at that is not one of my definitive best decks, but could be considered for it, is Gardevoir. I don't think Gardevoir is one of the best decks in format. Obviously, why it's not in my list from the previous slide, but it did just win a regional, and you really just can't overlook that, right? It did win a regional, and there were plenty of bad matchups there for it, plenty of Baby Blounds, plenty of Birds, and plenty of Dalstall, but the first place Gardevoir did play an Omastar, which can counter Dolls and Pidgeotto. I've seen plenty of Dolls and Birds players say Omastar doesn't counter it. It's hard for me to believe that. But Gardy did win the whole tournament in 1 Daytona. So just I'm showing how many were in day 1 for Daytona, just in case people are wondering why there was only 2 in day 2. Like, did only 2 people play it? No, there were 21 players that used Gardevoir, and 2 of them made it into day 2. Both of them made it into top 8, and then 1 of them won the whole tournament. So it did not have a very good conversion rate, because I don't think it was a great play for the tournament. But once it got into day 2 and top 8, and it wasn't seeing its bad matchups anymore, I think it had a pretty easy way through to finals, especially since Xander, Will, Franco, and Rahul, who were all piloting similar ADP decks, none of them were using Lucario Melmetal to my knowledge. And even if they were, Drew Kate, who won the whole tournament, played a Lugia GX to Lost Zone the Lucario Melmetal in the ADP matchup. So we didn't exactly get to see how that would play out since they weren't playing Lucario Melmetal. But I think this Gardevoir list was very prepared. If you want to see the list or any of the lists I'm talking about, of course, they're on limitlesstcg.com. But so why is Gardevoir not one of my best decks? I do believe it's meta dependent. Also, your list can counter a lot of things, but then maybe your list becomes clunky. But I do think it's a very, very meta-dependent deck, and that's something we've been saying for a while now. I remember even for AC in Knoxville, people were saying it's not a very safe deck for points. It's not a very safe deck to make it into day 2, but maybe if it hits all of its good matchups, it could just have a line to victory. And also, ADP can tech for it and swing the matchup substantially with a Lucario Melmetal, or even maybe 2 metal attackers, or just 2 copies of Lucario Melmetal if you cared about the matchup that much and you were scared of the Lugia GX. So just a couple things on why it's not definitively one of the best decks, in my opinion. In addition to it being meta dependent, it also doesn't have a consistent string of finishes, in my eyes, like something like Mewtwo does and like ADP Keldeo does from LAIC to Daytona. At LAIC, Guardian was a real flop. I think there was like 76 of them that were played and they didn't do very well. So just backing why it's not one of my best decks right now, but maybe if it performs again in San Diego this weekend, we would have to take a closer look at it and say, well, maybe the meta has just settled in a way that is very good for Guardian, and it's no longer looked at as meta dependent, and then it would just be a good deck. So next is Florges Dolls, another deck that is very strong, but I'm not very comfortable in calling it one of the best decks in format. I just don't think it's meta defining in that way. Florges Dolls did make top 8. It had a pretty good performance overall in the tournament in Daytona this past weekend. But the deck can be fairly easily countered by a Cryogonal, or even by like Lysander Labs, maybe an Ability Zard, so you can 9-tails up their Florges, or Faba, some sort of tool remover. But Cryogonal is a very popular counter for ADP decks, and then like we saw in the Guardian deck, the Omastar counters it because it restricts your opponent from playing items, and this deck has to play items because that's what the Pokédoll is. If it can't play items, it can't play its only thing that sits out in the active, and then it will lose. So why is it not definitively one of the best decks? I believe it's not one of the best because it can be teched for, and it can even take collateral damage from the Pidgeotto techs, because if you're teching for Pidgeotto, you're kind of teching for dolls at this point as well, because of the Cryogonal, and like I said, the Omastar, they both stop items. So if you have one of them in mind, you're probably also hitting the other, maybe without even realizing it with your techs. And Florges Dolls was heavily teched for in the ADP lists, but it seems like it had a pretty okay time through the rest of the meta at Daytona. So I don't think this deck could be the meta-defining deck. I don't think it could be the best deck in format when we look back on the Ultra Prism through Cosmic Eclipse standard format. But like I said, I do think Mewtwo and ADP could be that best deck in format when we look back. And the last deck I'm going to really look at here is Malamar, since I did think it was a really, really great play this past weekend, and it also did pretty well. Michael Catron got top 4 with it. There's a lot of different thoughts on Malamar, if it's consistent or not consistent, if it's even worth playing or not. And it's not one of the best decks in my eyes, because it has an unfavorable matchup to ADP and Guardian, which at least this next week, I think those 2 decks are going to be everywhere, and you should have a plan at beating either ADP or Guardian, or preferably both. Since ADP really popped off and Xander came out with this new great list for it, and then Guardian won the tournament, and everybody was doubting Guardian. I don't think many people had a lot of faith in Guardian. Also, Malamar has debatable consistency issues due to being an evolution-reliant deck, so you need to evolve your Malamars, and a lot of other decks in the game right now just don't have to evolve Pokemon. So that can be a big thing for Malamar, and if you get like a turn behind with Malamar, it just feels like you can't come back. If you miss a turn of putting 130 damage on your opponent's board because you didn't get a Shadow Impact off until turn 3 or turn 4, then it just feels like you've been put into this unwinnable position. Whereas Mewtwo, if Mewtwo misses an attack, it's like, okay, I'll just go ahead and swing for 300 next turn instead of this turn, right? And Malamar is constantly trying to build up damage on the board, and it's also hoping that their opponent can't heal with something like Mallow and Lana. Great potion, mixed herbs, things like that. And I think it's just more fragile. So I do think it's a good deck. I thought it was a great play this past weekend, but I don't think it could be one of the best decks in the format. And lastly, I haven't been doing tier lists too much, and you'll notice I haven't numbered the tiers or really even defined them, but these are just kind of the groups that I would put some of the top decks in the standard format in. I think Mewtwo and Mew and ADP Keldeo are both in their own tier right now. I think they are both in contention for best deck in format. I think Florges, Dolls, Malamar, and Guardian are all pretty good as well. Guardian just won, so it's on the cusp of being tier 1 right now, but I just personally can't call it tier 1. I don't think it has enough backing it yet, even though it did just win. And then Abilities Art and Pidgeotto Control are both respectable standard format decks. But I don't think they're anywhere near close being best deck in format, in my opinion. Pidgeotto Control has always seemed too fragile to me, too inconsistent. And now you can even tech against it with things like Omastar and Cryogonal. And then Abilities Art, it had its breakout performance yet again, and then kind of fall off when people knew about it. And I think it's just kind of a weaker Mewtwo and Mew. I really, really don't see a reason to play Abilities Art other than its ability to have single prize attackers in the deck pretty easily, and ADP Keldeo and also the Espeoxys or Ultra Necrozmas in Malamar kind of gatekeep single prizers out of the format, so I don't think you have to worry about that too much. That is going to wrap up my best decks in standard for week 3 of Cosmic Eclipse. This upcoming weekend, like I said, San Diego Regionals. I'm at a discussion video on the channel soon enough talking about that. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, like and comment, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.